The sun barely peeked above the horizon when Jonas Marlowe stirred from his sleep. The sound of waves crashing against the rocky shore was his daily alarm, one he neither cherished nor despised. It simply was. He sat up slowly, joints creaking as he swung his feet onto the worn wooden floor of his cabin. The place was small and sparse, with only the essentials of bed, a table, a stove, and a few relics of a past life that had slipped through his fingers like grains of sand. Jonas shuffled towards the stove, setting a pot of water to boil. His eyes drifted to the window, where the ocean glistened under the soft morning light. To him, the ocean was a contradiction at once beautiful and cruel, full of memories that refused to settle. He sipped his coffee in silence, savoring the bitterness that jolted him awake. After a few more minutes of inertia, he donned his worn fisherman's coat and stepped outside, heading for his boat. He had just reached the edge of the beach when he noticed a dark shape in the distance, larger than anything that usually washed ashore. Jonas narrowed his eyes, curiosity piqued, and started toward the anomaly. As he approached, the outline sharpened and his heart sank. It was a whale, massive and motionless, stranded on the sands like a fallen giant. The sight of it, so vulnerable, struck something deep within him. A pulse of emotion rippled through him, an emotion he hadn't felt in years: concern. Jonas stood there, uncertain of what to do. His instincts told him to turn back, to avoid getting involved. But something about the creature's labored breathing, the way it struggled to survive, kept him rooted in place. He could see the exhaustion in its every breath, the life fading from it. Against the part of him that craved solitude, Jonas found himself taking a step closer, his eyes softening. After a long pause, Jonas made a decision. He would help. He didn't know why exactly, but something about the whale called out to him. He returned to his cabin, rummaging for supplies, buckets, a tarp, anything that might aid in keeping the animal wet. When he returned, he set to work, dousing the whale with water, covering parts of its body to keep it from the sun's harsh rays. He talked as he worked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "You know," he murmured, as if the whale could understand, "you picked a hell of a place to get stuck." The hours passed slowly. The sun climbed higher, and Jonas's back ached from the effort, but he didn't stop. The whale's dark eye watched him, and Jonas wondered if the creature understood what he was trying to do. He caught himself talking to it more and more, his voice breaking the silence that had filled his life for too long. "This isn't the first time I've felt helpless, you know," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Memories of his son, Noah, flashed across his mind, his smile, his laughter, his boundless love for the sea. The pain was still raw, even after all these years, but as he looked at the whale, something shifted inside him. Maybe this was his chance to make a difference, to do something right for once. The sound of an approaching car broke his reverie. Jonas turned, squinting at the vehicle that made its way toward him. A woman stepped out, her hair tied back carelessly, her expression one of surprise and determination. She carried a sense of purpose that contrasted with Jonas's weary resignation. "Are you the one trying to save this whale?" she called out, her voice carrying over the distance. Jonas straightened, nodding. "Yeah, name's Jonas." "Clara," she introduced herself, striding over with a confident gait. "I'm a marine biologist. I heard about this from a passerby. Looks like you could use some help." Jonas wasn't sure how to feel about her sudden appearance. He had grown used to being alone, and Clara's arrival was like an intrusion into his carefully built solitude. But as he watched her assess the situation, her eyes filled with determination, he felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe he didn't have to do this alone. Together, they worked tirelessly. Clara was efficient, her knowledge guiding their efforts as they poured water over the whale, covering it with damp cloths to protect it from the sun. She spoke to Jonas with a calm authority, explaining their plan, giving him tasks. For the first time in a long while, Jonas felt part of something larger than himself. The whale's struggle had brought them together, and the feeling of unity was strange, almost comforting. But the tide was relentless. As the hours passed, Jonas could see the water inching closer, the waves growing stronger. Clara made frantic calls, trying to rally more help, but there was no guarantee they would succeed. The fear of failure gripped Jonas's heart, an all-too-familiar sensation. He clenched his jaw, pushing away the thought. He couldn't let this happen, not again. By late afternoon, a small group of locals arrived, bringing supplies and much-needed hands. Jonas worked alongside them, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. Clara's encouragement kept him going, her determination infectious. They labored into the night, taking turns keeping watch, feeding the whale water, making sure it stayed cool. As the sun set and the crowd thinned, Jonas found himself alone with the whale once more. Clara had gone to get some rest, leaving him with the quiet and the sound of waves lapping against the shore. He sat beside the whale, resting his hand on its rough skin. He spoke softly, the words coming unbidden, as if the whale was the only one who could truly understand. "I lost my son to this ocean," he said, his voice breaking. "No." He was likely drawn to the water, to its mysteries. "I couldn't save him. But maybe I can save you." The whale blinked, its gaze meeting Jonas's, and he felt an inexplicable connection, a bond that transcended species, a silent understanding of pain and struggle. For the first time in years, Jonas allowed himself to cry. The tears came freely, washing away some of the bitterness that had taken root in his heart. The whale's presence was like a mirror, reflecting his own sorrow, but also offering a glimmer of hope. When dawn broke, Clara returned, her eyes bright with determination. She had brought good news. There was a chance they could use the rising tide to help move the whale back into deeper waters. They needed to act fast. The urgency in her voice pulled Jonas from his exhaustion, filling him with renewed energy. He looked at Clara, then at the whale. "Let's do this," he said, his voice steady. They worked tirelessly, guiding the whale as the tide began to rise, the water lifting the creature little by little. It was a painstaking process, the effort monumental, but Jonas felt a fire in his chest, a determination he hadn't known in years. The whale moved, slowly at first, then with more ease as the ocean reclaimed it. The moment the whale began to swim on its own, the group erupted in cheers. Jonas stood back, watching, a rare smile touching his lips. The sight of the whale, free and alive, filled him with something he had long thought lost hope. As the others left, Clara approached Jonas, her smile gentle. "You did good today, Jonas." He nodded, unable to find the words. But as he looked out at the vast ocean, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new, a chance to find his way back to the world he had abandoned, one small step at a time. The first light of dawn bathed the horizon as Jonas stood on the beach, weary yet resolute. The whale lay still, and for a moment, fear seized his heart. Had they lost it during the night? But then he saw the subtle rise and fall of its side, the labored breath still moving through its massive frame. Clara returned with fresh energy, her expression brightened by the morning light. "We have a chance, Jonas," she said, her voice filled with hope. "The tide's coming in." If we can guide it just right, the whale might make it back. Jonas nodded, feeling a blend of exhaustion and determination. Clara wasn't alone this time. A group of volunteers gathered behind her, locals who had heard about the rescue. They carried ropes, tarps, and buckets, ready to do whatever it took. Jonas felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest as he looked at them, a sense of gratitude mixed with the realization that he wasn't as alone as he had thought. "All right, everyone," Clara addressed the group. "The plan is to use the rising tide to help move the whale. We'll use the ropes to gently guide it. Slow and steady, it's a fragile situation, and we have to be careful not to injure it further." Jonas was handed a length of rope. He joined Clara and the others as they arranged themselves strategically around the whale. The plan was to pull gently as the waves crept closer, coaxing the creature back toward deeper water. The first few attempts were agonizingly slow. They heaved together, the ropes taut between their hands, as the water rose higher up the beach. Each wave brought a glimmer of hope as it lapped around the whale's body, making it just a bit lighter. Jonas felt the muscles in his arms burning, but he welcomed the pain. It meant he was doing something, taking action instead of letting the past drown him. "One more pull, everyone," Clara shouted, her voice a beacon of determination. Jonas glanced at her, her eyes shone with fierce resolve, and he found himself mirroring her determination. The group leaned in again, bodies straining against the resistance. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the whale began to move. It shifted with the pull of the tide, inching closer to freedom. Cheers erupted from the volunteers, their voices filled with hope. Jonas let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, and a rare smile touched his lips. It was working. For the next hour, they continued their painstaking efforts. The tide rose higher, and the whale responded more, its massive body starting to sway with the rhythm of the ocean. The moment the creature began to move on its own, everyone paused, watching in awe. The whale, guided by their efforts and by the power of the sea, slowly started to glide forward, away from the shore. Jonas stood back, his hands trembling from exhaustion, as he watched the whale move further into the ocean. The cheers from the volunteers were almost drowned out by the crashing waves. A sense of profound relief washed over him, mingled with a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in years prior. As the whale disappeared into the deeper waters, Clara approached Jonas, her face flushed with exertion but glowing with joy. "We did it," she said softly. "You did it, Jonas." Jonas shook his head. "We all did it." He looked at the others, their faces alight with triumph, and then back at the ocean, the vast expanse stretching before them. He could barely believe it. The whale was free, and for the first time in years, Jonas felt a strange sense of freedom too. The volunteers began to disperse, leaving Jonas and Clara standing alone on the beach. The exhaustion that had been held at bay by adrenaline now settled heavily in Jonas's bones. He dropped to sit on the damp sand, staring out at the horizon. Clara joined him, her gaze following his. For a while, they sat in silence, the waves now gentle, lapping at the shore. Clara finally spoke, her voice gentle. "You know, I've been doing this for years, but it's rare to see someone as dedicated as you were today." Jonas shrugged, still looking out to sea. "I guess it was something I needed to do." Clara turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "You were fighting for more than just that whale, weren't you?" He didn't answer immediately. He wasn't used to sharing, wasn't used to having someone care enough to ask. Finally, he nodded. It felt like a second chance, he said, his voice barely audible over the waves. Something I couldn't do before. Clara didn't push for more. She simply nodded, as if she understood. After a while, she stood, brushing the sand from her hands. I'm glad you were here, Jonas. I think you made all the difference today. Jonas watched as she walked away, her figure growing smaller as she made her way up the beach. The sun was higher now, the day brightening around him. He looked back at the ocean, the place that had once taken everything from him, and he felt something begin to shift. Maybe it was time to stop running, to face the tide instead of hiding from it. That evening, Jonas returned to his cabin, his body aching with fatigue, but his mind unusually light. He set about his usual routine, making a simple meal, lighting the lantern, but everything felt slightly different, as if some weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He was about to settle into his chair when he heard a knock at the door. He opened it to find Clara standing there, holding a folded piece of paper. I wanted to give you this, she said, handing it to him. It's from one of the children who came to help today. Jonas took the paper, unfolding it carefully. It was a drawing, a simple, colorful depiction of a whale swimming in the ocean, with a caption that read, "Thank you, hero fisherman." Jonas felt his throat tighten, and he swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the innocence and gratitude in the child's gesture. He looked up at Clara, unable to find the right words. She smiled. You did something amazing today, Jonas, and people noticed. I hope you realize that. For a moment, he stood there, staring at the drawing, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He nodded, finally managing a quiet, "Thank you." Clara turned to leave, but paused. We could use someone like you at the Marine Center, she said, her tone casual but hopeful. Think about it, we're always looking for volunteers. Jonas watched her disappear into the twilight before closing the door behind him. He looked at the drawing again, its bright colors a stark contrast to the muted tones of his cabin. He set it on the table, staring at it for a long while, volunteering. The idea both terrified and intrigued him. It meant stepping out of the solitary life he had built for himself, opening up to people again, taking a risk. He wasn't sure he was ready. But as he looked at the drawing, at the whale swimming free, he felt something stir inside him, a sense of possibility, of hope. Maybe it was time to try, to let himself be part of something again. He took a deep breath, feeling the salty air fill his lungs, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to consider the idea of a future, one where he wasn't alone, one where he might find redemption, not just for the whale, but for himself. The tide had turned, and Jonas Marlowe was ready to see where it would take him. The sun was still low in the sky when Jonas found himself standing in front of the local marine center. He wasn't sure what had brought him here today. Perhaps it was the drawing, now sitting on his table back home, or maybe it was Clara's invitation, delivered with such genuine belief in him. Whatever it was, it had pushed him out of his cabin, his safe solitude, to stand here, facing a door that represented an uncertain future. The building was modest, its exterior painted in pale blue, blending almost seamlessly with the surrounding ocean and sky. Jonas hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and stepped inside. He was greeted by the faint scent of saltwater and the murmur of people in the distance. He spotted Clara almost immediately. She was near one of the tanks, speaking animatedly to a group of volunteers. When she saw him, her face lit up. "Jonas, you came." She sounded genuinely pleased, and it warmed him in a way he hadn't expected. Yeah, well, Jonas cleared his throat, feeling awkward. I thought I'd see what this place is about. Clara smiled and gestured for him to follow her. "Come on, let me show you around." As they moved through the center, Clara introduced him to the various volunteers, each busy with their own tasks. There were tanks filled with injured marine animals, turtles, a few small sharks, and even a young dolphin that swam slowly, its side scarred from a boat propeller. Jonas couldn't help but feel a pang as he watched the dolphin, its eyes large and soulful, reflecting both vulnerability and resilience. "That's Daisy," Clara said, following his gaze. "She's been with us for a few weeks now. She was found injured, and we've been rehabilitating her. She's a fighter, though. I think she's going to make it." Jonas nodded, watching the dolphin glide through the water. The way Daisy moved reminded him of Noah, the same fearlessness, the same draw to the sea. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember his son, not the painful memory of losing him, but the joy Noah had always found in the ocean, the wonder in his eyes whenever they go out on the boat together. "She's beautiful," Jonas said quietly, his voice barely audible. Clara gave him a sideways glance. "You know, the animals here need people like you. People who understand them, who care." Jonas shook his head slightly, a half-hearted denial on his lips, but Clara continued, undeterred. "Why don't you help me today? Just try it out. No commitment, no pressure." He hesitated, the familiar urge to retreat rising within him. But as he looked at Clara, at the trust in her eyes, he found himself nodding. "All right, I'll give it a try." Clara's smile was warm, and she patted him on the arm. "Great. Let's start with feeding Daisy. It's simple, you'll get the hang of it in no time." She led him over to a small room where the fish were kept, explaining the process as they went. Jonas listened, his focus on the task at hand keeping his doubts at bay. Clara handed him a bucket filled with fish, and they returned to the dolphin's tank. Jonas watched as Daisy swam up, her eyes wide, her body language cautious but curious. Clara gestured for him to feed her, and Jonas reached into the bucket, taking a fish in his hand. He held it out over the tank, watching as Daisy approached, her movements deliberate. She took the fish from his hand gently, her eyes never leaving his. Jonas felt a strange sense of connection, the simple act of feeding the dolphin grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. "See," Clara said softly, standing beside him. "She trusts you." Jonas nodded, his gaze still fixed on Daisy. He could feel something loosening inside him, a small crack in the wall he had built around his heart. Clara's words echoed in his mind. Trust. It had been so long since he had allowed himself to trust anyone, including himself. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Clara showed Jonas how to help clean the tanks, how to prepare the food for the various animals, and how to monitor their behavior. It was hard work, and Jonas found himself sweating, his muscles aching from the unaccustomed effort. But it felt good. There was a purpose to each action, a reason behind every task. As the afternoon sun began to filter through the small windows of the marine center, Clara brought Jonas over to a small brick area. They sat down, and she handed him a cup of water. "So, what do you think?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. Jonas took a sip, considering her question. "It's different," he admitted. "Good, I think. I haven't done anything like this in years." Clara nodded. "You're good at it, Jonas. You really are. The animals can sense it when someone cares." Jonas looked down at the cup in his hands, the simple compliment touching him more than he expected. "It's strange," he said quietly, "being around people again. I didn't think I'd be able to do it." Clara's voice was gentle when she spoke. You've been through a lot. No one expects you to change overnight. But today, you made a difference, Jonas. That's something. Jonas met her gaze, and for the first time, he allowed himself to smile a real smile, not just a reflex. Maybe, he said, maybe I could come back tomorrow, if you need me. Clara's face lit up, and she nodded. We'd love to have you back. As Jonas left the Marine Center that evening, he felt a sense of lightness he hadn't known in years. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with the colors of the setting sun, a vivid mix of orange and pink. He walked slowly back towards his cabin, the sound of the waves a constant presence beside him. When he reached the cabin, he paused at the door, looking out at the ocean. The memories of Noah were still there, sharp, painful, but they didn't feel as overwhelming as they had before. For the first time, they felt like something he could carry without being crushed under their weight. He stepped inside, setting down his things, and his eyes fell on the drawing Clara had given him, the whale swimming free, the words "hero fisherman" scrawled at the bottom. He picked it up, tracing the lines with his fingers, and a quiet determination settled within him. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to let the tides carry him back to where he belonged, to the world he had abandoned, to the people who had tried to reach him. It wouldn't be easy, and he knew there would be days when the pain would feel like too much. But today, he had taken a step, however small, and it had mattered. Jonas set the drawing back down, his heart feeling lighter. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to find out. And that, he thought, was enough for now. The early morning air was crisp as Jonas made his way to the Marine Center, a quiet resolve in his steps. Today marked his first day as an official volunteer, and though there was a part of him that felt anxious, the sense of purpose driving him forward was stronger. The sun was barely rising, casting a soft golden glow over the ocean, and for once, Jonas felt like he was stepping towards something rather than running away. Clara greeted him with a warm smile as he entered the Marine Center. Good morning, Jonas. Glad you're here. Her cheerful demeanor was infectious, and Jonas found himself nodding in return, his lips curving into a small smile. Morning, Clara, he replied, trying to keep his nerves in check. Clara handed him a clipboard filled with tasks for the day, and they walked together toward the main rehabilitation area. It was bustling already, with volunteers moving between tanks, preparing food, and tending to the injured marine animals. Jonas felt a pang of uncertainty. It was a busy environment, far different from the solitude he was used to. Let's start you off with something simple, Clara said, leading him to Daisy's tank. The young dolphin swam slowly, her movements more fluid now, a sign that her condition was improving. Clara handed Jonas a bucket of fish and nodded toward Daisy. She's doing better, thanks to all the care she's been getting. Why don't you feed her while I handle some of the other animals? Jonas nodded, grateful for the familiarity of the task. He took a deep breath, scooping out a fish from the bucket. As he held it out over the tank, Daisy approached, her eyes meeting his with curiosity and, he thought, maybe a hint of recognition. She took the fish from his hand, her movements gentle, and Jonas felt that strange sense of connection again, the bond that had begun to form the first time he fed her. Good girl, he murmured, his voice soft. He watched her eat, her sleek body gliding through the water, and a sense of peace settled over him. For so long, Jonas had felt adrift, unmoored, but here, surrounded by people working together to help creatures that couldn't help themselves, he found a small sense of belonging. As the morning progressed, Clara moved between tasks, checking in on Jonas and showing him the ropes. She guided him through cleaning the tanks, feeding the different animals, and even assisting with some of the medical checks. It was hard work, the kind that left him sore and tired, but there was something immensely satisfying about it, a tangible purpose in every action. Around midday, Clara called for a break, and they settled into a shaded area just outside the center, where a small group of volunteers had gathered. Jonas sat down, taking a sip of water, and let himself relax for a moment. The air was filled with the sound of waves, the chatter of the other volunteers, and the occasional call of a seagull. It was a comforting cacophony, one that Jonas found he didn't mind. "How are you feeling?" Clara asked, sitting down beside him. Jonas considered her question, then nodded. "Good. It's different, but in a good way. I didn't realize how much I needed something like this." Clara smiled, her eyes warm. "I'm glad to hear that. You're a natural, Jonas. The animals can sense it. You know when someone truly cares." Jonas looked down, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's strange," he admitted. "I've spent so long keeping everyone at a distance. I didn't think I could do this, be part of something again." Clara's expression softened. "You are not alone in that. A lot of us here have our own reasons for wanting to help. Sometimes it's easier to care for something vulnerable, something that needs us, than to face our own pain." Jonas glanced at her, her words resonating deeply. He could see the truth in her eyes, the weight of her own experiences that she carried. He nodded, his voice quiet when he spoke. "I think that's why I'm here. I need to feel like I'm doing something that matters." Clara reached over, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. "And you are, Jonas? More than you know." The afternoon brought new tasks, helping Clara with a medical check for one of the injured sea turtles, organizing supplies, and even assisting with a group of schoolchildren who had come for a visit. The children's excitement was palpable, their laughter echoing through the Marine Center as Clara gave them a tour, explaining the importance of marine conservation. Jonas hung back at first, unsure of how to interact, but Clara nudged him forward. "Come on, Jonas," she said with a grin. "You are great with the animals. The kids will love hearing from you." Jonas hesitated, but then one of the children, a little boy with wide eyes, tugged at his sleeve. "Mister, can you tell us about the dolphin?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. Jonas felt a lump form in his throat, but he crouched down to the boy's level, nodding. "Her name is Daisy," he began, his voice steadying as he spoke. "She got hurt, but she's getting better now because everyone here is taking care of her. She's really brave." The boy's eyes lit up, and he turned to his friends, his excitement contagious. Jonas found himself smiling, the warmth of the children's curiosity breaking through his usual reserve. As he spoke, Clara watched from a distance, her smile filled with quiet pride. When the day finally wound down, Jonas felt a deep exhaustion settle into his bones. But it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from hard work, from doing something meaningful. As he and Clara walked out of the Marine Center together, she turned to him, her smile gentle. "So, will we see you tomorrow?" she asked. Jonas paused, looking out at the ocean. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the water, and for a moment, he allowed himself to feel the peace that came with the close of the day. He nodded, a small but genuine smile touching his lips. "Yeah," he said. "I think I'd like that." Clara beamed, and they parted ways, Jonas heading back toward his cabin. The walk home was quiet, the cool evening air soothing. As he reached his cabin, he paused, his gaze drifting to the horizon where the ocean met the sky. The memories of Noah were still there, still sharp and painful, but they no longer felt as all-consuming. Today, he had done something good, something that mattered, and he knew that Noah would have been proud. Jonas stepped inside, setting down his things, and moved to the small table where the drawing of the whale still sat. He picked it up, looking at the bright colors, the words "Hero Fisherman" scrawled across the bottom. He smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. Maybe this was what redemption felt like, not a single grand gesture, but small, steady steps towards something better. And maybe, just maybe, he could keep taking those steps, one day at a time. Jonas set the drawing down and looked out at the ocean once more, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He was unsure what the future held, but for the first time, he was ready to face it. And that, he thought, was enough. Jonas awoke to the sound of the waves, the familiar rhythm calming him, though his heart felt restless. Today was the day he had decided to see Emily. The letter she had written lay on his small table, the words now committed to memory, words of pride, of forgiveness, and of hope. They had stirred something inside him, something he had thought long buried. He had spent years in isolation, but now, it seemed, the walls he had built were finally beginning to crumble. It was late morning when Jonas found himself in front of a small CAF in town. He hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the door handle, the memories of a past life flashing through his mind. The laughter that once filled his home, Emily's warm smile, and the carefree energy of Noah running toward the sea, all of it felt distant, yet so painfully vivid. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The CAF was modest, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and baked goods. It was busy, the hum of conversation filling the air. Jonas scanned the room until he saw her Emily, sitting by the window, her eyes looking out at the street, a thoughtful expression on her face. She looked almost the same, her auburn hair streaked with grey now, her green eyes holding a mix of hope and sadness. "Emily," he called softly as he approached. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise before a gentle smile spread across her face. "Jonas," she said, standing to greet him. There was a moment of hesitation before they embraced, tentative at first, then a little tighter, as if both were unsure but willing to try. They sat down, the silence between them heavy, yet not entirely uncomfortable. Jonas wasn't sure where to start, and for a few moments, they simply looked at each other, years of unspoken words filling the space. Emily broke the silence first. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice soft. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. "I heard about what you did with the whale, and with the Marine Center. I wanted you to know how proud I am of you." Jonas swallowed hard, nodding slightly. "I wasn't sure I'd be able to do it," he admitted, "after everything. I just wanted to make something right." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "You did, Jonas. You've always had that strength, even when you couldn't see it yourself." Jonas looked down, the weight of his grief pressing against him. He took a deep breath, his voice almost a whisper. "I never thought I'd be able to face you again after Noah. I failed you both." Emily shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No, Jonas. We both lost Noah. It wasn't your fault. I know you've carried that guilt for so long, but it's not yours to bear alone." She paused, her voice trembling. "I lost you too, after that day. And I've missed you more than I can say." Jonas felt his chest tighten, the pain of all those years apart, the isolation he had imposed on himself. He closed his eyes, letting the memories surface, the arguments, the silence, the way he had pushed Emily away. believing he was unworthy of her love after losing their son. He had buried himself in his own sorrow, hoping it would somehow atone for his perceived failure. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how to come back. It felt like I had nothing left to give." Emily's eyes softened, and she reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "You still have so much, Jonas. You have a good heart. I've always known that. And you're starting to see it too, aren't you? The whale, the marine center they're giving you a way to heal." Jonas nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I want to believe that. I'm trying to, but it's hard. I spent so long pushing everything away, convincing myself I didn't deserve happiness." Emily squeezed his hand. "You do deserve it, Jonas, and you're not alone. You never were. I want us to try again, to find a way back to each other." She smiled, a tear escaping down her cheek. Noah would have wanted that. Hearing his son's name was like a knife to the heart. But this time, the pain was not unbearable. It was softened by the warmth in Emily's eyes, by the love he could still see there despite everything. He nodded, tears filling his own eyes. "I miss him every day, but maybe it's time I stop letting that pain define me." Emily smiled, a mixture of hope and sadness in her expression. "Maybe it's time we let him live in the good memories, not just in the hurt." Jonas nodded, a sense of peace beginning to wash over him. They spoke for a long time after that about Noah, about the years that had passed, and about what might lie ahead. It wasn't easy, and there were tears, but there was also laughter, shared memories that brought light to the dark corners of their past. When they finally stood to leave, Emily reached for his hand, and he took it, a warmth spreading through him that he hadn't felt in years. They walked out of the CF together, the sun setting on the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. It was a beautiful evening, and for the first time, Jonas allowed himself to see it, to appreciate it without the shadow of grief clouding his view. As they walked along the waterfront, Emily leaned into him slightly, her head resting against his shoulder. "Come see me again soon?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Jonas smiled, nodding. "I'd like that." They parted ways at her door, a promise of a future visit lingering between them. As Jonas walked back to his cabin, he felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his heart. The memories of Noah were still there, but they no longer felt like chains holding him down. Instead, they were part of him, part of what had brought him to this point, a point where he could see hope, where he could imagine a future not defined solely by loss. He reached his cabin, the air cool as the first stars began to dot the sky. Jonas stepped inside, his eyes falling on the drawing of the whale that still sat on his table. He picked it up, looking at it in the dim light, and smiled. He set it back down, his heart filled with quiet determination. Tomorrow, he would return to the Marine Center, ready to continue his work there. He would face each day as it came, embracing the people who had reached out to him, the opportunities he had pushed away for so long. And he would see Emily again, not as a broken man, but as someone who was learning to heal, learning to hope again. Jonas looked out at the ocean, its waves glistening under the starlight, and for the first time, he didn't feel fear or regret. He felt gratitude for the second chance he had been given, for the love that still remained, and for the promise of what was yet to come. And with that, he allowed himself to rest, knowing that the tides of his life were finally shifting, carrying him towards something new and beautiful. Resignation, now the acceptance of something undesirable but inevitable. Explanation, the feeling of giving up or accepting something that is difficult. Example, Jonas lived with quiet resignation, believing he could never change his fate. Solitude now in the state of being alone, often by choice. Explanation: the condition of being isolated or without company. Example: Jonas had grown accustomed to his solitude, finding comfort in the quietness. Reverie now in a state of being pleasantly lost in one's thoughts. Daydreaming. Explanation: a moment where someone is deeply lost in thought. Example: the sound of an approaching car broke Jonas's reverie. Laborde adj. Done with difficulty or considerable effort. Explanation: describes something that requires a lot of physical or mental effort. Example: the whale's laborde breaths were a sign of its struggle to survive. Resilient adj. Able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. Explanation: showing the ability to recover from setbacks or challenges. Example: the dolphin was resilient, recovering slowly but surely from its injuries. Estrangement now in the state of being distant or disconnected from someone. Explanation: a condition in which people who were once close are now separated emotionally. Example: Jonas had experienced years of estrangement from Emily after Noah's death. Rehabilitation now in the action of restoring someone or something to health or normal life. Explanation: the process of helping someone or something recover from harm. Example: Clara worked tirelessly on the rehabilitation of the injured dolphin. Transcend verb: to go beyond the limits of something. Explanation: to surpass or rise above physical, emotional, or mental boundaries. Example: Jonas felt his bond with the whale transcend species, as if they understood each other's pain. Did you enjoy Jonas Marlowe's journey in this heartfelt tale of struggle, redemption, and unexpected companionship? I hope you found the story both touching and easy to understand in English. Let me know if you could follow along well. Was the language accessible for you? If you're looking to continue improving your comprehension, more stories await you on this channel. Each one is a chance to learn and grow. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggested story to keep you on this learning path. Click it, relax, and let's explore more together. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you in the next one.